Hi, welcome to the Elmhurst History Museum. My name is Sarah Cox and I'm the curator of exhibits here. Welcome to our newest exhibit, Chicagoland Movie Palaces, A Century of Folly and Film. This exhibition was inspired by the 100th anniversary of our local theater, York Theater. What we wanted to do was we wanted to explore other movie palaces here in the Chicagoland area and the impact they make on our movie-going experience. The movie theater experience is one of innovation and adaptation through the past 100 years. This exhibition will look at what a movie palace is, the architects that built them, the different types of movies that were shown, and innovations that took place over the past 100 years. The exhibition includes a number of artifacts, historic photos, and even a few props from some of our favorite movies. Now, the term movie palace is not one that a lot of people are familiar with. A movie palace is really another name for a movie theater, but it's actually a very unique type of movie theater. Usually they were a one-of-a-kind movie theater designed by an architect, and the design on the interior and the exterior often emulated the palaces of Europe. For example, Versailles. So on the interior, you would have ornate plaster work, gilded gold pieces, brass work, you'd have sparkling chandeliers, bright light work. You'd also have things that looked like Parisian designs, Egyptian designs. They would be very, very unique in the way that they were designed because they wanted to take you to a different place. They wanted to take you out of your everyday life and transport you to a different world and experience. Now, there's a number of places that we would know as movie palaces that maybe you don't know were movie palaces, such as the Chicago Theater, the Cadillac Palace Theater, which was originally the Palace Theater. There's also the Nederlander, which used to be the Oriental Theater. All of these started as movie palaces back in the day, and today they are transformed into a different type of performance space. In the gallery, we have a touchboard here with different elements of a movie palace. So we have an example of marquee letters, some of the plaster and ironwork. We have some of the crystals from a chandelier. You can also see the size of the marquee lights that would cover the actual light bulbs, and you even have a chance to touch the red velvet that they would use to cover the seating in the auditorium. Now, to design these special movie palaces, you needed a special architect. Chicago at the time was the center point for a number of famous architects such as Louis Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright. Now, many of the architects that built the movie palaces actually worked for these big-name architects and then moved on to their own practices and specifically started designing movie palaces. One of the big architecture firms to do that was Rapp and Rapp. Rapp and Rapp went to school here and university here in the state of Illinois and then moved their practice to Chicago, where they became well known for the design of some of their movie palaces. Some of those would be the Uptown Theater, the Chicago Theater, and the Oriental Theater. Now, here in Elmhurst, we have the York Theater, which was designed by Elmer Behrens. He also designed the Egyptian Theater out in DeKalb. Now, these two theaters are two very different designs. The Egyptian Theater was inspired by the early discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Then you have the York Theater, which was inspired by the Spanish Revival style. This became popular after the 1915 Panama, California Expo. Now, a number of other design elements that we've included in this exhibition include some wall hangings from local theaters here in the suburbs. We also have some architectural prints from Rapp and Rapp of the Capitol Theater. The other thing was that because Chicago was the hub for the Midwest in terms of design, we also had a lot of companies here that provided artwork and those elements we spoke of earlier, such as the plaster work and the gilding work. One of those big companies was the Decorator Supply Company. You could custom order your plaster work that would go in your movie palace, or you can pick from one of their catalogs, which we have featured here in the exhibit. You also had custom movie theater seating. You got to pick your fabric. You got to pick the design that would go on the sides of the seat. We have an example here in the exhibition, but we also have catalogs showing the different types of theater seating that could be shown. Now, we also have some artwork included from artists such as Nelly Studios, who designed more modern movie palaces in the style of Art Deco. We have a number of his pieces included in the exhibition, including a hand painting and some early vaudeville prints. One of the other elements that occurred within a movie palaces that designers were needed for was the atmospheric theater. The designer John Eberson was the one who began this practice. So if you ever go in a theater, for example, like the Arcada in St. Charles, you'll notice there's a night sky with sparkling stars. This was his invention. You'll see it in a number of other theaters throughout Chicagoland, in particular the Avalon Theater in Chicago. Now, before movie palaces started showing movies, there was an earlier form of entertainment in these theaters, and that was called vaudeville. Vaudeville was the most popular form of entertainment from 1880 up into the late 1920s. These are what we would think of as variety performances. You would have comedians, you would have slapstick funny performances, you would have musical performances. Sometimes there were performances that involved animals, and in this time we got vaudeville stars for the first time. People could see these famous performances and then also buy pictures of them. They could buy programs with their faces on them, and they had people that they could worship, the first kind of stars before movie stars, let's say. Now, Chicago was the Midwest hub for a number of vaudeville circuits, along with booking offices that were located on Dearborn and Randolph. In our gallery, we have a number of pieces, including an early vaudeville magazine cover designed by Alfonso and Nelly. Chicago was host to a number of publication companies that published vaudeville magazines about the latest performances, what were the most popular songs being sung, and also the news on the latest stars. We also have examples of early contracts, programs from the different theaters in Chicago that hosted vaudeville, along with pictures of a number of vaudeville stars. You'll notice some of the stars might look familiar. You might see Bob Hope in there, you might see Judy Garland, as they got their start in vaudeville before they made their way to the silver screen. Now, vaudeville started to go out of favor in the 1920s, and that's because that's when some of the first motion pictures came out. Now, mind you, they're not like motion pictures we see today that are an hour and a half to 2 hours long. They were 10 to 15 minute short stories. And when they started being shown in these theaters, they started mixing vaudeville performances and then showing a movie, and then they'd have more performances and then showing a movie. But eventually, people became more enamored with the motion pictures as they started having better storylines, recognizable stars that were once on the vaudeville stage, then moved to the silver screen, and that kind of led to vaudeville slowly moving out of public's favor, and people really wanted to see more motion pictures on the big screen. Now, these early films that were about 10 to 15 minutes long were not only shown in theaters, but also shown in what were called storefront arcades, museums, or they were called Nickelodeons. Now, these were just little storefronts, and then what they had is they had a screen at the end in one big room, and then they had 2 sets of seating and a row down the middle where people could walk up and down. Now, people would obviously go in these places, they'd pay a small fee, often a nickel, that's where we get the name Nickelodeon from, to see these short films. Now, they could sit there all day and watch the movies, or just watch 1 or 2 and leave. There were other ways for them to watch movies other than seeing it on a big screen. They would use things like a mutoscope or even a kinetoscope, and these would be ones that you would hand crank the film through, and they would be 2 to 3 minutes long, just little sketches, whether they be comedies or dramas. Now, people we have to thank for this are early pioneers in film, like the Lumiere brothers and Thomas Edison. In our gallery, in the exhibition, we do have some early film reels, canisters from Edison's studio, along with Pathé's studio out of France. Now, what you'll also see is you'll learn about the first films to come out were silent. There were no sound, there was no color, and like I mentioned earlier, they really didn't have too much of a storyline because they had to fit so much into a short amount of time. So you'll see the historic photos of some of the early silent theaters, along with something that were called film exchanges here in Chicago. So what theaters would do here is they would not have to just order or purchase their film reels all the way from California, which was just becoming the center of the film world. What they would do is we'd have these film exchanges. Ours were located on Wabash, so studios like Paramount, 20th Century Fox, RKO would have these buildings where theaters could go in, rent the film reels. They wouldn't have to pay for them. They could also go in there and get movie posters, lobby cards to help promote the movies. This was kind of their center, and Chicago was the Midwest center for different kinds of movie palaces to rent their movie reels, and so they could change up the different movies that they were hosting every day and every week. Now the head of Warner Brothers was like, who wants to hear actors speak? Well, eventually the American public did. So in 1927, the first talkie was created, and that was the movie The Jazz Singer, starring Al Jolson. Now, Al Jolson started off as a vaudeville star himself, but in this one, some of the first words that he says is, "You ain't heard nothing yet," which was quite fitting, considering those were the first words that people heard on screen from an actor. Now, once the American public saw this in movie theaters, they were hooked. They wanted all their movies to have sound, and Warner Brothers had the technology. Now, after sound, one of the other things that they started working on was color. Now, previously, black and white films had been tinted. So when they're getting developed and processed, they're put into a special tint. And it could have been an array of colors from red to a sepia to yellow to blue. And they were all supposed to emulate a feel. So if there was a film tinted in blue, it meant this was a night scene. If it was a sepia tone, it was a Western movie. If it was a yellow film, then it was a love story. Now, eventually they come up with a technology, and it's called Technicolor. Now, there's often a misnomer with what was the first Technicolor film. A lot of people associate that with The Wizard of Oz, which came out in 1939. Now, that was not the first color film. The first color film was actually produced by Disney. It was a short film. It was called Flowers and Trees, and it was just a little musical number. The first animated full-length feature film was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which won an Academy Award for Special Achievement. And then you have eventually coming along The Wizard of Oz. Now, The Wizard of Oz we often associate with being the first color film is because of the way that they used Technicolor film. They really wanted to highlight the technology by using bright, vibrant sets. They wanted to use iconic colors, so we always think of the Emerald City or the ruby red slippers. They wanted that to stick in people's minds. And they really wanted the technology of Technicolor to really go from there and have everybody start using Technicolor because of what they were able to do in The Wizard of Oz. Now, Technicolor meant that filmmakers had to use bigger cameras, it cost more money, and it isn't until about the 1950s where Kodak Eastman invents color film. So they no longer need these 3 film reels in a camera anymore. They don't need to do any special processing. It is already in color. So in the gallery, we have a few photos about what the tinting process was like, images from those first color movies. We also have an example of Cecil B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth, because often movies were advertised that they used Technicolor, so people knew that they were going to see the most vibrant colors that they've ever seen. After the advent of adding sound to film and color, we enter what was called the Golden Age. This was the Golden Age of Hollywood. This was the height of popularity of movie theaters, and that's thanks to the type of movies that were coming out. They were trying to adapt to the new needs of the people who were going to the movies at this time. So they were adding things in like air conditioning, more comfortable seating. They were doing changing up the different shows that they did during the year. This is also the time where we see the height of the studio system and the star system in Hollywood, which led to a number of studios being like matched with certain type of movies. So you had MGM, who was making these big pictures like Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. You had Universal, who became known for their monster movies like Frankenstein and The Mummy. You had RKO, who was making the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movies. So you had often studios who were owning certain theaters, and their movies were the only ones that were shown there. That was part of the studio system. So in Chicago, we had like the Paramount Palace Theater, or we'd have the RKO Theater here. So when you went to that theater, you kind of knew what kind of movie you were getting into, which was extremely interesting. So Warner Brothers was also doing like the gangster movies like Public Enemy and The Maltese Falcon. Also during this time, you really see the peak of advertising outside movie theaters. You see movie posters, you see lobby cards. Lobby cards is a term that not a lot of people are familiar with. So instead of one movie poster kind of giving you the feel of the movie, you would have a set of about 8 cards that would be set on almost like a sandwich board. And they would show key scenes from the movies, including the scenes where the stars were in, because they really wanted to show that the star was in a number of scenes within the movie. So they would use that to help advertise. I mean, aside from the big sparkling marquee with the chasing lights, the advertising that movie theaters would use to bring people in really helped drive the crowds that we see during the 1930s and 40s. Now, another way that people, elevated their experience in the movie theater was the advent of concessions inside the theater. Before 1930, if people wanted to get a snack or a meal, they would have to go to a restaurant or what we would deem a food truck, a food wagon, get their food and bring it in. Now, during the 1930s, of course, we're in the middle of the Great Depression. They wanted to find another way to make money apart from ticket sales. So what they decided to do was put a concession stand, a concession counter, into the lobby of these movie palaces. Now, one of the great things that we know about going to the movies is that you're always guaranteed you can get a bucket of popcorn. Now, the story of how popcorn became synonymous with movie theaters is thanks to a Chicago company called Curator. Chicago-based company Curator was one of the first people to come up with a popcorn popping machine along with a peanut roaster. Begun in 1888 by Curator, we feature a full 1925 Eclipse popcorn popper and peanut roaster in our gallery. You'll notice that in the popcorn machine, you'll see a little clown. That is Toasty Roasty. He was an iconic part of Curator's popcorn machines. While he was just ornamental, he has become synonymous with their early popcorn machines. Now, before their popcorn machines were concession stands, they had wagons outside and they had smaller popcorn machines outside the theaters. It was during the 1930s that those popcorn machines came into the theater and were part of a concession stand. Now, when we used to get these today, we know we get popcorn in a tub or in a bag. They used to come in boxes. In the gallery, we feature a number of early Curator's boxes with a face of a boy on there. He was called the Booster Boy. Curator was hoping that the popcorn sales would boost theater sales for theater owners and hopefully get them through the early Great Depression. Now, a number of other early snacks were available during the Great Depression, such as Milk Duds, Raisinets, Twizzlers, and Goobers. Having popcorn at the movie theater has really become synonymous with going to the theater. It's part of the experience. It's one of the first things you smell when you walk into the lobby. And it continued to be advertised, the concessions were, well into the 1950s and 60s. And a lot of people remember a very famous commercial that would appear, especially at the drive-in theaters. Let's all go to the lobby. In the gallery, I feature a number of vintage caricatures of the popcorn, hot dog, and drink dancing through the lobby. Following the heightened record attendance at the movie theaters in the 1940s, they saw a sharp dip in attendance numbers in the 1950s, and that was because of the invention of television. Now, while televisions were around in the 1940s, they weren't a widespread commodity. People didn't really own them. They were very expensive. It was a luxury item. And it wasn't until they became more affordable in the mid-50s that more people owned them and more people were staying home to watch television than go to the movie theaters. So what a lot of movie makers and movie theaters did was try to change the experience that people were having. And this meant that they were trying to alter the experience that they were having with each movie. So movie makers and theater owners, I should say, were trying to make it more immersive when they went to the movie theater. So for example, one of the early forms of what I would call spectacles of the movie theater era of the 1950s to the 70s is Cinerama. This was a widescreen format shot with 3 rolls of film, and it was projected using 3 projectors. And it was supposed to give you this panoramic effect when you were at the movie theater. There was one located in Chicago. It was called the CineStage Theater. It was at 186 North Dearborn. Another way that they were trying to change the experience was through 3D. They invented 3D glasses at this time, which didn't always give you a great visual just because all the glasses were just a little off. But we have some examples of early 3D glasses in our exhibit. Another type of spectacle was Sense Surround. This is almost like what we have today with our 4XD movie-going experience, where you weren't just sitting in a seat. The seat would be able to move, it would be able to rumble, you would get water coming at you, you would get high wind coming at you. One of the popular movies that was done in Sense Surround was the movie Earthquake from Universal. So we have an example of a movie theater featuring that. Another thing which was kind of interesting, they just made, I believe, 2 movies with it, was Smell-O-Vision. And it's exactly what you think it is. So what they would do is they would show a movie and they would give people a program, and during certain points in the movie, a scent would be emanated throughout the auditorium. So if someone was smoking a cigar, you smelled a cigar. If someone's holding a bouquet of flowers, you would smell roses. And so we have an example of one of the programs from the movie Scent of Mystery, and then also a few pictures from the inside of all the different scents that people would be smelling. Now, understandably, that didn't last very long. I can only imagine what the auditorium smelled like, but it was just one of the many ways that they were trying to change the experience that people couldn't have at home through television, that they could have in a movie theater. Another way was, at this time, it's the baby boom time. So a lot of people are having families. Sometimes they couldn't find a babysitter, so they tried to make going to the movies easy by coming up with drive-in movie theaters. There were over 4,000 across the country. Today, unfortunately, there's only 400 left, but this was a way where people could go to the movies, bring their kids. I think a lot of us remember playing on the swing sets and playgrounds that were right under the screen. You'd have your concession stand in the back. You would see that famous commercial for Let's All Go to the Lobby, promoting getting concessions, but it was just another way that they were trying to drive people to the movies during this time. Also during this time, you'll also see CinemaScope. CinemaScope was almost another version of Cinerama, except instead of 3 cameras projecting on a big screen, it was just one, and it was already shot in a widescreen format. Movies like Ben-Hur and Lawrence of Arabia were shot in CinemaScope, and even more recently, the movie La La Land was shot in CinemaScope, because they were really trying to capture all of the landmarks and the landscape of Los Angeles. Now, the previous section about blockbusters, that run of films lasted from the 1970s through to the 1990s, early 1990s. But again, the film industry really had another change up thanks to Steven Spielberg. And that was with the movie Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park really changed the way, again, movies were made, because this is the time where we get into the digital age, not just for movies being made, but for how movies were being shown shown and shipped and purchased to movie theaters as well. Because of movies like Jurassic Park, a lot of theaters had to improve their projection equipment, sound equipment, the quality of the picture that was coming through the projector, so that people could capture all the details of these new graphics that were coming out. The digital age also allowed for new stories to be told that probably couldn't be told before, like Titanic, Braveheart, Dances with Wolves. You also have animated movies come out like Toy Story and Shrek, which really changed the game. But it's during this time that you see another surge of audiences going back to the movies because of these new stories being told in film. It also means that the design for movie theaters also changed during this time. No longer are they doing what they used to do, where they'd be doing Art Deco design or trying to emulate the movie palaces of Europe. Now it's pretty simplistic. Most movie theaters have a pretty standard design, 2 different hallways, up to 15, 16 theaters. One movie can be shown in 5 theaters if it's the big summer blockbuster, or it's the Oscar bait movie coming out in December. So you see the design of theaters change during this time. Movie theater owners also realize that they make more money off of concessions than they do movie tickets. So you see an expansion of the concession stand. So no longer is it just popcorn and a candy bar, but now you can get full meals. Some theaters do specialty meals to go with specialty movies that they're showing. You can order your food online on your phone and then have it delivered to your seat. You also see the comfort level in movie theater auditoriums change. So it's not just a red velvet seat anymore. You have your cup holder. You also have some chairs that recline, some that lean back a little bit, especially when you're in the big IMAX theaters. So this is a huge change in the way that we had the movie palaces that opened in the 1910s, 1920s to the multiplexes that were opening here in the 1990s. Because the big thing that was driving people to the movies and that studios wanted was people bringing in big box office numbers. Back in the 1930s and 40s, that just wasn't a thing. They didn't care about box office numbers. 1990s, they care very much about box office numbers because that means a success for the studio, an success for the movie makers. So they tried to bring back 3D movies, but there are some 3D movies that still exist. They've improved the glasses that come with 3D, but oftentimes you really see the 3D mixed in with IMAX. IMAX is just basically an updated version of what Cinerama and Cinescope were trying to do, which was an expanded, almost panoramic picture. You have better frames per second, you have better quality of film, and that really helps with the digital movies that come out like Dune Part 1 and 2, or Oppenheimer. And so oftentimes you'll see IMAX 3D glasses used in this capacity rather than just a 3D movie, because they want you to experience these movies in the best possible light. So in the gallery, like I said, we have examples of the glasses. We do have a Dune Part 2 movie poster, but then we also have some fun movie props. Now, what would an exhibit about movies be without some movie props? We were lucky enough to work with NBC Universal in securing a few props from 2 key movies during the 1990s, some of my favorite as well. You might recognize this outfit here. This is from the movie Jurassic Park from 1993. This was the movie-worn costume worn by Laura Dern during the bulk of the movie. So we were very, very lucky to get that. We also have a picture to kind of reference what she looked like. We also have a number of other artifacts from Jurassic Park. While I unfortunately could not get the Barbasol can, which I so desperately wanted, we were able to get some of the dinosaur eggs that Dr. Alan Grant does find later with the children in the nest. We also have the license plate from Jeep number 18. This was the Jeep that picked up Ellie Sattler and Dr. Grant when they landed on at Jurassic Park and takes them to go see the first dinosaur, the Brontosaurus. We were also lucky enough to get a couple other props from one of my other favorite movies, which is 1999's The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser. This was really fun to be able to look through all of the different props that they had from the movies. It's one of the great things about being a curator, is getting to look to see what people have. We're very thankful that NBC Universal lent those pieces to our exhibit. Now today, a lot of the movie palaces in the Chicagoland area have sadly either closed and been demolished, closed and they've been converted into community centers or churches, or they've remained a theater, they're just not showing movies anymore. They now do musical performances or Broadway Chicago. So one of those was Chicago Theater showed movies up until the 1980s when it converted to just a performance space for special speakers, comedians, musical performances. Some Broadway Chicago. You also have what was the Oriental is now the Nederlander. You have the Majestic Theater, which became the CIBC Theater. The Pickwick is another popular one that remains a movie theater today. There are places like the Music Box Theater, which do musical performances, but they also host special film festivals and special film series for people to be able to see. So that's just another great example. Obviously, you have our York Theater here in Elmhurst. What started off as one screen now has 10 screens, and it's kind of the central point of downtown Elmhurst. I implore you, if you can, to see a movie in one of these movie palaces, or next time you're sitting in the Nederlander or the CIBC, imagine seeing Casablanca on a screen on the main stage, or sitting in Chicago Theater and seeing The Maltese Falcon. I think it's just an amazing experience. The York Theater is doing a movie series throughout to celebrate its 100th anniversary, and that's every Wednesday. And so if you have a chance, do it. It's such a wonderful experience, and I really hope that people really begin to appreciate these places that are still around and still showing movies, and appreciate the little movie palace gems that they have in their own hometowns. Chicagoland Movie Palaces, A Century of Folly and Film, is open until January 5th. Hopefully you can join us. We are open Tuesday through Sunday, 1 to 5, and Saturdays 10 to 5. If you want to learn more about the York Theater, we do have a section included in the exhibition on the York Theater, along with a video spotlight up in our By All Accounts Theater as well. I'd like to thank our contributors and our sponsors for helping put this exhibition together. Without them, I could not be able to do this. So thank you so much. We'll see you soon.